and I guess my original thought was that theater worked kind of like the film studios used to, where if you wrote a spec screenplay, you got it to an agent who then sent it to a producer on the lot, who then decided whether or not to make it. And unless you're William Goldman, you would have nothing to do with it. They would buy the rights, and then they would ruin it.
Hello and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, I interview peak performing innovators in the creative, social impact, and earth conservation spaces who are working to change the world. This episode is brought to you by Brain FM. Brain FM combines the best of music and neuroscience to help you relax, focus, meditate, and even sleep. I love it and have been using it to write, create, and do some of my deepest work. Because you're a listener of the show, you can get a free trial. Head over to brain.fm/innovative mindset to check it out. If you decide to subscribe, you can get 20% off with the coupon code Innovative Mindset, all one word. And now, let's get to the show. Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg. I'm your host, and I want to thank you so much for being here. I am honored, thrilled, and excited, as always, to be talking to this week's guest. You've heard me talk to him. You've heard me talk about him. You know what a big fangirl I am of Bill Fitzhugh. He is the award-winning author of many comic and satiric crime novels. His debut, Pest Control, was translated into half a dozen languages. The film rights sold to Warner Brothers. It was produced as a popular radio show in Germany and as a stage musical in Los Angeles. Prior to Human Resources, Fitzhugh published The Exterminators, the sequel to Pest Control. The New York Times said Fitzhugh is in a league with Carl Hiaasen and Elmore Leonard. They are not wrong. He is a strange and deadly amalgam of screenwriter and comic novelist. The late great political humorist Molly Ivins said Fitzhugh is one seriously funny guy. A one-time FM rock DJ, he wrote, produced, and hosted Fitzhugh's all-hand mixed vinyl for 5 years on SiriusXM's Deep Track channel. Born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, Fitzhugh lives in Los Angeles, where he's at work on his next project. And the most recent thing that I've read is fabulous. It's a play, and it's based on his latest book called A Perfect Harvest. Bill, thank you so much for being here. Welcome.
Hi, Isolde. Nice to be here.
I'm so excited to talk to you about all of the things that you have going on. I know that all of your books have just been re-released by a new publisher. And I saw, if you look at the show notes, if you look at the promo, you're going to see all the covers sitting behind Bill. Bill, tell me what happened there. What caused you to go, you know what? It's time to re-release everything.
It wasn't... I was doing it on my own anyway, as I got as rights reverted on different titles, and put them up on Amazon because it's something you can do. Where 25 years ago, when I started doing this, that wasn't an option. If you went out of print, you went out of print, and people had to go to used bookstores and find you. And then the internet came along, and then you could find stuff on eBay, old physical books. But then Amazon gives authors the chance to, do print on demand with their old titles or brand new stuff or whatever. But I was sitting around minding my own business, and I got an email from a woman who worked for Duckworth Books in London, saying that they specialize in humorous fiction. And they wanted to reprint any of my books that I had the rights for. So we went back and forth, and I had the rights to maybe half the books, most in the U.S. Excuse me. And I don't think I had the rights back to anything that was published in the U.K. But I sent letters to all the publishers, and they said no. And I sent a stronger letter, and they finally said, "Oh, okay, fine." So I got all the rights in all territories to all my books, and went back to Duckworth, and they said, that they wanted to reprint everything, and in a slightly different order. They wanted to organize it more than I had done as I wrote them. So they put the two, Pest Control and The Exterminators, they came out sequentially. and they had me write a short story called The Bug Job that introduced sort of the world of insects. It doesn't involve Bob and Klaus, who were in the other two books, the assassin bug books, but it would give, and they just gave that out to their list. It would just give their readers a sense of what's this guy's writing like. And then they put the four, what we call the transplant tetralogy, the organ grinders, heart seizure, human resources, and A Perfect Harvest. All the organ transplant related books came out sequentially. And then the two Rick Shannon books are coming out this month and next month. And then the other two sort of standalones, Cross-Dressing, is that right? Yeah. Cross-Dressing and Fender Benders. I don't know if they're out yet or not. But anyway, and they asked if I was writing anything new, which I wasn't, but of course I said, sure, of course I am, always writing. And at this point I was developing the play, The Altruist. And it's a story, so there's plays are just a different way of telling a story than a novel or a film or a radio play, whatever. So I set about adapting the story for a novel because the play is pretty limited. It's like in the same way that I adapted Pest Control and Cross-Dressing and Heart Seizure from screenplays that no one would buy, turned them into novels, which changes the story sort of stays the same. You'd find out more stuff about the world that the character lives in because the novel gives you that opportunity. So I wrote the novel, or I pitched it, and he said, "Oh, that sounds great." Wrote the novel in record time because working from a screenplay or a play, you've got everything worked out already. You know what the characters are like, you know what the whole story is, the beginning, the middle, the end. Oops.
Dun, dun, dun.
Stop
and
that.
The phone rang at just
Leave
the right
me
moment.
alone. Who calls the landline anymore?
A telemarketer, of course.
It was. I get to do my extended automobile warranty.
Yes, those are prolific right now. They're coming across every day or so. Yeah.
So wrote the novel, and they loved it, and so it's been published. But the way this all came about is it's got a long history, and it sort of goes to the question that people ask writers a lot. So where do you get your ideas? And so in 1995 or so, I wrote The Organ Grinders, the second book, and it's a crazy sci-fi sort of thing about the biotechnology, some aspect of biotechnology, medical biotech, looking to find ways to transplant animal organs into people, because the supply and demand situation, there's a shortage of human organs, and if they could just figure out a way to transplant animal organs, there's money to be made. And the problem is just in rejection. I mean, that's the problem with human to human transplants, but an animal, a different species introduced into the human body, and the body's immune system attacks it. So that's the big problem to solve, which of course in my book someone does. But they're mainly, I think one of the main things that they've been working with are pig organs. And in Organ Grinders, I thought, well, you probably have some fun with some pigs, but wouldn't some sort of a primate be better? Because first of all, it seems like the DNA is going to be closer. There's less of a hurdle to overcome in the rejection. Plus, it's an easier for and I didn't go with chimps because they're endangered and hard to get your hands on. Baboons, on the other hand, you can work with those. And so, whereas a pig, if you leave a shotgun lying around, a pig's not likely to be able to pick it up and do anything, but a baboon could.
Right.
So, of course, they do when given the opportunity. But
Sure.
anyway, so I wrote this. So there's this crazy story about all these transgenic baboons on this giant farm in the piney woods of Mississippi. And I had, by this point, become friends with the playwright Leonard Gersh. Leonard Gersh wrote, among other things, most famous for writing Butterflies Are Free,
Mm-hmm.
a huge Broadway hit and a movie. And then he wrote a bunch of television stuff. He wrote stuff with the Gershwins. He was a great old school Hollywood kind of guy. And he read the Organ Grinders and sent me a funny note saying, "Oh, we should turn this into a musical." And he wrote some funny jokes about it. And then he wrote some lyrics, which are actually a few of the lyrics in the first song in the play and in the book.
Mm.
So I thought, well, that's very funny. Yes, but I don't do stage, so I just put the idea of, it wasn't even an idea. It's like, that's just funny. And thanks for writing. Years later, I read a story in the newspaper about a guy in Georgia who was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease.
Mm.
And he had the idea of donating all of his organs as his, and donate all of his organs, die on the operating table doing so, but saves 8 people's lives. And he doesn't have to die of Lou Gehrig's disease. Seems like a great, and I thought, that's a great story. But I couldn't see how to write it as a comic novel. So I put the idea aside. And then I don't really know how, what happens, but it's like, hey, wait a minute. What if I put the two ideas together somehow? The idea of turning a crazy transplant story into a musical. How would you do that? And the result is The Altruist, which has gone through several drafts. I mean, in earlier drafts, there were characters who were no longer there. A cousin, an alleged distant cousin shows up and has this crazy story about how she's related, and she's there to, offer, whatever help she can. But, oh, by the way, I need a kidney.
Mm.
And but she got cut from the next draft. So then I'm sending I've never dealt with theater people before. I mean, I've got some friends who are artistic directors and do stuff. And I got some information on, so, well, you just send a query letter out, you go to the websites, you get a Dramatist Guild guide, look for all the theaters, see what they're looking for, and then, see if they're accepting submissions. So I, in the same way that I said about getting a literary agent 25 years ago, started, made a list and started sending stuff out, and mostly just didn't hear back from anybody.
Mm.
Most theaters are underfunded, understaffed. Some would get back and say, this is not for us, and that's fine. But thanks for getting back to me. So my favorite rejection letter was, "We've already gone out of business."
Oh my.
Yeah, well, it's theater, and they do that, and especially in the past 2 years with the pandemic.
Sure.
A lot of small theaters have gone under. But so I don't know, I've got 50, 60 rejection letters from around the country and the UK. And then it sort of dawns, and I've been sending to some of the Los Angeles and San Diego and Bay Area theaters. Again, no positive responses. And then I remembered, or it dawned on me, well, there are a lot of theaters in North Hollywood. It's what's called the NoHo Arts District here in the San Fernando Valley. And one where Pest Control was produced as a musical. Look on YouTube for those videos. It was a pretty astounding show. In fact, I found out recently I think it's the most expensive show produced at an equity waiver theater in Los Angeles ever.
Wow.
Yeah, they put a lot of money and a lot of talent were in that. But anyway, so I knew there are a lot of these theaters in North Hollywood, and I, found a list of them and sent out my query letters, and quickly got a response from Doug Haverty at the group rep over on Burbank Avenue. And so in my cover letter, I mentioned pest control and all that. And I think he was under the impression that I had written the musical. And I quickly, disabused him of that notion that no, I just wrote the book. Somebody else wrote the musical. And of course, in musicals, there is something called a book. So, I didn't write the book for the musical. I wrote the novel that they based it on. Okay, that's fine. Still, he read The Altruist and invited me to join the group rep. And which has been around for quite a long time, 60 years or so, I think. And so they develop plays. So I would go in and they assign a bunch of actors, and members come to the theater, and the actors sit on stage with music stands in front and read the play. Very unrehearsed. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I got there an hour or two ahead of time to try to explain how the songs went. But one of the reasons that I wrote it the way I did is, and what I mean by that is that I used public domain melodies, and not, there are plenty of obscure public domain songs, but I picked ones that I was familiar with and figured, well, if I know them, a lot of people know, Midnight Special, Will the Circle Be Unbroken, the Erie Canal song, all that kind of stuff.
Bill Bailey, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So, and in the original draft, it was all a cappella. So, and this is not really a big spoiler. This is no more spoiler alert than the flap copy on the book is. The story is that a guy is diagnosed with not one, but two terminal diseases, and wants to do what the guy in Georgia did. And since then, by the way, since the guy in Georgia, a few other people in the U.S. have tried to do the same thing, either after being diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's or with multiple sclerosis, and they've not been allowed. I don't know that anyone has ever actually gone to court, but it seemed to me like that would be, the thing to do for the story. You've got to, sue the state, because the state of California gives you the right to donate your organs free from interference. Actually, it's a federal law, the United, I forget the name of the law, but there's a federal law that if you are an organ donor, if you've got the designation on your driver's license, if you have a donor card, whatever, you are guaranteed the right to donate your organs free from interference from anybody. And in California, at the time I was writing this, they were just passing the Right to Die Act, so physician-assisted death, where you have the absolute right, free from interference from anybody, to avail yourself of this right. Problem is, the way they wrote the law is you have to do it not in a public place. A hospital is considered a public place. So you do it at home. By the time you get to the hospital, then your organs are not viable for transplant. So the way they've set the law up for AB 15, which is the name of the physician-assisted death law, the way they require you to do it interferes with your ability to donate your organs. So that's the basis of their lawsuit. We're going to sue on the grounds that my equal protection is being violated. And then they go get some publicity. The public finds out about it. A lot of people are supporters. Some people are antagonistic towards this guy's request. And that gets the word out. And the next thing you know, there's a knock on the door, and a music producer shows up saying he wants to turn this into an opera. So that's sort of the whole premise. And that's how we get to the songs. I just, started with Leonard's lyrics When at work or at play, hear those organ grinders say, have you got any organs today? And I kept repeating it, and I ended up finding that it worked with the melody for the caisson song. And the caissons go marching along. When at work or at play, hear the organ grinders say, have you got any organs today? So then I fleshed it out, wrote another chorus, and wrote another verse or two and a chorus. And then I realized, first of all, it was fun to write the song. Then I went, found a bunch of melodies, and then just started writing these goofy songs, trying to find ways to what rhymes with pancreas, that kind of thing. So we did the first reading at the group rep. I got some very good notes. In fact, the original draft that we read, Leonard is not a narrator. He shows up only at the end of the first act. And somebody said, well, he just kind of comes out of the blue and sort of draws a lot of attention away from Miguel, who's the guy who's dying. And I got a couple of the notes, but I thought, what if, he comes out as the narrator? And another thing was people weren't sure of the relationship of the other main characters. So, I can solve that easily. Leonard comes out at the very top, explains that he's there to tell a story about these people who are related in this way and, enjoy the show. And then he comes back at the beginning of the next scene and says, I know you're disappointed I wasn't in that last one, but, blah, blah, blah. And then this happened. And then he keeps, he does that for the first 3 scenes, I think. And he's not in the scenes. He just comes out and sets up the scene. And then late in the 5th scene, he's suddenly in the play. He's a character. He's no longer the narrator. And so I liked how that worked. So we went back for the next stage of development, which was a lightly rehearsed reading. And so, and the director who was assigned by the theater company is one of their musical guys, a guy named Bruce Kimmel, who's been around Hollywood for a long time. I didn't know who he was, but if you look up the first nudie musical featuring, among other people, Cindy Williams, with whom he went to school, which explains why she's in this ridiculous movie. And if you, or more specifically, if you just look up the Dancing Dildo song, you'll get a sense of, who he is. So anyway, he's assigned as the director, and he produces, what do you call, when people get up, cabarets. He produces a cabaret show here in Los Angeles. Anyway, he decided we have to have music. We can't have everybody singing these songs a cappella. So one of the group members is a very good piano player, probably plays a lot of other instruments too, a guy named Paul Cady. So he becomes part of the play, providing the just piano. He's the accompanist, but he's not in the play, at least in the draft that you read. He's not in there. So Bruce simply had him off on the side of the stage, and whatever character was about to sing a song would pause and say, "Maestro," and he would start playing. And it added a lot to have just basic, somebody playing the chords of the song to accompany the voices. We did that in front of an audience of just group members, not to the public yet. And it was great, very well received. Hardly any notes on how you could what was wrong with it or anything. But I still thought, man, it's a little bit long. I need to kill some darlings here, and I ended up cutting 4 or 5 pages from the draft that you read.
Hmm.
A lot of dialogue that was, well, that's cute, but it doesn't get anything. It
Mm.
doesn't advance the character or the plot. It's just a joke I thought was okay. So I took it out. But now that I know that Paul Cady will be playing keyboards in the scene where Leonard first shows up, and they're trying to, Miguel's friends keep trying to throw Leonard out. And he says, well, you haven't even heard the first number yet. Miguel says, yes, we'd love to hear it. And I wrote into the apartment that there's a, electric keyboard somewhere, like Miguel plays piano. And he says, look, I see you've got a piano, so, let me just do the opening number. And they said, okay, fine. So he goes to the front door and reaches out and pulls somebody in who just kind of looks a little perplexed. And they say, well, who the hell is that? He says, well, this is Maestro, my mute accompanist. and he says, I'm not mute. And that's the only line he gets for the whole play.
Other than playing the piano.
From that point, he's just sitting over at the piano the whole time, providing, and they always turn over and say, Maestro, because that's his name. So, I mean, those are some of the few differences in the draft that you have and the one that will go up. So the next stage is what they call a two-nighter, where it's much more heavily rehearsed to the point that the actors are off book, mm-hmm. and it's open to the public for 2 nights. And that'll be sometime next year, because things are planned pretty far in advance in theater, because it takes forever to get stuff, get people rehearsed. And, this is not like they're making a living wage doing this. LA is just full of people who are going on auditions for commercials, TV shows, movies, and they do theater in the meanwhile.
Mm-hmm.
So a bunch of really talented people. Some of the cast was not quite right for the last version of it. So a couple of roles will be recast, but several were, spot on. And I assume they will get that job back. But it's been great fun. So we'll do this, what's called the two-nighter, after which I guess the artistic council or whatever it's called at the theater decides whether or not to turn it into a full-fledged production on the main stage for 6 weeks. But it's been great. It's been great fun, and I've just fallen in with these people because there's a lot of building the sets and so forth. And I love building stuff. So I pack my tools up and go over there. And in fact, I was there this morning. I built a little staircase. It was very nice.
I love that you're getting to have such a big hand in being in having the show go up. You didn't just write it and go, okay, off you go. You're involved, it sounds like, in a lot of different aspects of putting this production on. And congratulations, first of all, that this is your first hand really at this, and look at what you've accomplished. That's amazing.
Well, it is. I mean, and I guess my original thought was that theater worked kind of like the film studios used to, where if you wrote a spec screenplay, you got it to an agent who then sent it to a producer on the lot, who then decided whether or not to make it. And you would, unless you're William Goldman, you would have nothing to do with it. They would buy the rights, and then they would ruin it. But they would send checks, which you just, if you're playing the game, that's how it goes, and that's fine. So when I was sending all these query letters out to theaters around the country, mm-hmm. I thought, well, if somebody likes it, they'll take it on and they'll produce it, but I don't need to be there, right? Because they're theater folk, they know what to do. So it's much more fun being hands-on. And one of the reasons that I heard back so quickly from Doug Haverty turns out is that he had just become the artistic director at this theater. He'd been with this group for a long time, but he had just become the artistic director and was reviving the writers unit. There are 100 actors and a bunch of people who direct, and then there are a bunch of tech people, the lighting and the sound people. But the writing unit had sort of gone neglected for a while. So now it's like last night I was there watching a rehearsed reading of a play called Surviving Frank Lloyd Wright by one of the members. And next week it's, what is next week? I don't know the title of next week's. But so Monday nights, there's a lightly rehearsed version of some member's play. On Saturday mornings, there is the sort of the first level reading of new plays. And, anybody who's in the writer's unit or just an actor, anybody else, is invited to be there and give feedback to the playwright. So, and doing that is useful as a writer. I mean, me watching someone else's play and seeing what I think works, what I think doesn't work, trying to articulate why it does or doesn't, sort of helps you become a better writer yourself. So, it is, but I think I'm much better off being able to be there with the people who are doing it and learning the whole process. It's just, plus I get to use my power tools.
It sounds like there's a certain amount of glory in that too. It's interesting listening to you talk about getting feedback from people. One of the things that struck me was that you're getting feedback in the moment from the actors, from the people who might be the set designers, from the director. You as the writer get to see through all of these different lenses how your work might be improved from their perspective. What does that do for you, knowing that this is an actor saying, this works, this doesn't work, this could be improved, this needs some work or whatever, versus the director? Is there a different flavor to that feedback, and how does it change what you do with the play that you've written?
Well, a note, a good note is a good note. It doesn't matter who gives it to you. If you recognize that, oh yeah, don't give that information here, hide it until later and spring it on them here. A good note's a good note, no matter where it comes from, and a bad one too. And over, the course of writing a dozen novels, I've gotten a lot of good notes and bad notes. And not that I can always tell one from the other, but you just have a sense of, I don't see how that works, or I think that doesn't work because, and I've got a list of reasons, versus that's a great idea. That'll change a few things downstream, but I can fix those. But it strengthens the character, or it gives you a good twist. It does something, and you just have to be able to evaluate whether it's good or not. But from one of the technical things, the play originally, what I hoped was that, so the first scene is at the doctor's office. The guy gets the diagnosis. Then, I need a drink. So they go to the bar. And in the bar, I had written originally that there would be, half a dozen television screens showing sports, as usually happens in a bar. And in the course of the scene, without anybody ever commenting on it, the TVs, the screens would change from being basketball, for example, to the face of a person, pretty close up, not really looking at the camera, but just sort of, there. And, might scratch at their cheek. They're just kind of looking around. And at the bottom of the screen was a countdown clock, counting down to 0. And so one at a time, all the television showing sports would turn into the face of a person with a countdown clock. And then through the rest of the play, the screens would always be somewhere. And periodically the countdown clock would reach 0. And that person's eyes would close and the screen would go black. And then it would come back up with another person and a new clock. And then a different one later would go. And eventually you come to figure out, oh, these are the people who are dying because the lists for organs are too long and people die while they're on the list.
Right.
So while there's all this zany stuff transpiring on stage, there's this serious thing going on, which I thought, oh, it's very theatrical. I really like it. But talking to a technical person said, well, yeah, couple of problems is, the lights are facing towards the stage. The screens are facing towards the lights. They're not going to be easy to see.
Right.
It's going to be impossible to really time the countdown clocks to a line of dialogue in the script. I can do that while I'm writing it. I can say, and at this point, right after this line, which is a perfect line for someone to die, that one of the screens goes black. But there's no way that they're never going to read the play at the same pace 2 nights in a row.
For sure.
So there were, some technical aspects that made me think, and the other thing dawned on me was, and people might be now start looking at the clocks to see who's next, when is that one going to die, and I wasn't listening to what they said on stage.
Right.
I stopped paying attention.
Right.
So it may have been a little bit of sensory overload. So that sort of feedback from the technical people made me drop all of that from the script.
Sure. And it's, that notion of pulling focus there's a lot of zaniness that goes on. Having read the play, it's very zany. It's hilarious and it's dark, macabre humor, and I love it. And yet there's a lot of really rich language that happens. Even if Leonard is being a completely ridiculous person in the room, what he says has substance, what he says has meaning, and you want to be listening to what these people are saying and how they're coming to their realizations. So when you're writing this and you're writing the book from the play or the play from the book, I'm confused about which went first again. I think the book came after the play, right?
Correct.
What was the difference? Like you said something earlier in this conversation that, it's going to be very different, the play versus the book. And I have not read the book. I've just read the play. And what I'm wondering about is the play takes place in a relatively short period of time. How different is that from the book? And how was that adaptation with the constraints of the play where it's, dialogue and action versus a whole lot of exposition versus a whole lot of description? How was that unfolding for you to go from the play to the book?
Well, I've done it 3 times. Pest control, heart seizure, and cross-dressing were written as screenplays. And there's only so much information you can put in 120 pages, and screenplays have limitations on types of information that you want to put in there. But they function beautifully as outlines because you better have developed your characters to a good degree. Your plot is completely worked out. If you've figured out what your second act problems are and solved those or hidden them or done something, and then you can sort of expand. So in Pest Control, I couldn't really get into the science of the assassin bugs, the biology of them. But in the book, I can go off and, have a colorful paragraph about how the blood-sucking cone nose does this. And if you cross it with the thread-legged bug, who's got these traits, the hybrid is going to be this, killing machine. Um, you wouldn't put all that stuff in a script. You would, there would be a quick scene in the lab where you see the insects, and one insect kills another one, and anyway. So for the altruist turning it into the perfect harvest, it's like in the altruist, all you know is that at the end, someone throws a bomb. You don't know who it is or why. In the book, we learn who the character is. I didn't know. I mean, I had to figure it out because, in the play, it doesn't matter who it is. It's just there are people outside protesting this guy, trying to have the state kill him, essentially. And one of them gets carried away and, throws a bomb. So, but I didn't want, I needed to have a character do that. And, who is that character and why is that character doing it? And it's one of the things that Leonard because he's the narrator of the novel as well, which is the first time I've ever done that. I've never had a first person. I've never written a novel in the first person. They've always been third omniscient. And so while, Leonard says, well, of course, I didn't know all of, the things about what this guy was doing because I wasn't there. But the reason I can tell you about what he was doing before I knew him is that it all came out at the trial. So he's telling the story after, the whole thing has happened.
Right.
And the guy was arrested and we find out his whole backstory. But I told it sequentially. I didn't dump it on you at the very end and say, here's what we found out at the trial. I write it, as though it were third person, but it's Leonard telling us this story because he knows what that guy was doing and how he got the bomb and so forth. And there was other stuff about if Leonard wants to get this play going in Los Angeles, he's got to go talk to the theater people. And he goes and meets with some old, Broadway people who have moved out here. And he gets a lead to go to talk to this other person. And, here's a potential money guy. And, what we really need is if we could get a star attached, that would be great. And and I had this in mind at one point with the play is I have a list of well-known actors who have had organ transplants. And I, see if they're interested in, doing this as a play. And one of the actors is a woman who's in Modern Family. I can't remember the character's name, but one of the sisters, one of the daughters of, do you watch Modern Family? Can you help me with these names?
What is it? Lucy
So
Hale?
the real estate guy and his wife have 2 daughters and a son.
Right.
One of the daughters is the studious academic type. One of them is a social media type. So that actress, the social media actress, has had 2 kidney transplants.
Really?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Well, if you look these things up, hoping to find somebody you can send a script to. So I thought, well, there it is right there. They're sitting at Miguel's in the car with Leonard at a stoplight, and a bus pulls up with a big advertisement for a Modern Family-like show. It's wrapping up its 15th season. It's going to go off the air. And he says, she's really good. She's had a kidney transplant. Oh my God. So Leonard immediately contacts her, and we get to meet her and her agency and how excited she is about doing this whole thing. So there's all that kind of stuff that's all very organic to the story. But that there's no room for that in the play.
Right.
But in the course of the novel, it's there. So, and there is a little overlap. I built in human resources,
Uh-huh.
the third of the tetralogy. There's an underground transplant hospital in Los Angeles, and that comes into play in A Perfect Harvest. Some of the same characters. There's some cross seeding of characters between the books. So I wanted to have some connection between the books, the
Mm-hmm.
transplant books. So there was stuff that I could use in this organ transplant world I've been writing about, to flesh out stuff that is true to the story of the play, but there was no room in the play for it.
Right.
It was essentially backstory for somebody, but in the novel you're able to bring it out and make that part of the actual story.
And it's so interesting to me that you say that there is no room and I can use it in the novel. And then to make things even more, I guess big is the word that comes to mind. You're peppering things among all the novels that will relate one to the other. And I think that enriches the world that you've built. And I wonder when you're doing that. Oh, and by the way, Sarah Hyland is her name. I just wanted
Thank
to.
you. Yes, Sarah
Yeah,
Hyland.
I thought of it and I went, oh, I wanted to say that. So when you're doing that, when you're thinking about the plot of the book or the plot of the play, how much of that is I'm going to make it vast and make it bigger than just the one book, make it bigger than just the one play? How much thought do you give to that? Or is that something that happens during the process of you writing it?
I was during the process. It was not. There was no pre-planning.
Mm.
I wrote the Organ Grinders in '95 based on a newspaper article about xenografting, and I thought it was a standalone book. And then, in the course of writing the Organ Grinders and learning about how organs are distributed and some other stuff, it's like, oh, here's this other story idea. I mean, it's got nothing to do with this one, but I found out because of doing all the transplant research, here's this other story, and that became Heart Seizure. In the course of which I thought about, well, what if you could do this and this and this, and that's a great story, and that became Human Resources.
Right.
And then, but I guess I could have tried to bring in characters from from Heart Seizure or Organ Grinders into Human Resources. I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was doing the Altruist, I finally, let's try to connect some dots, because Organ Grinders is mostly in the Bay Area and in Mississippi, where this baboon farm is.
Mm-hmm.
Heart Seizure was in LA, so I mean, yeah, so I could have included some of those people, but I didn't. And then the next two are also set in Los Angeles. So I finally figured out, I can, cross-populate characters from previous books into the new book, and people can recognize those things. I will say this. When I first submitted the Altruist to the group rep, this was pre-pandemic. And so we were starting to do that first read, and then Doug Haverty gave what's called a writer's prompt to anybody in the group who wanted to do it. Said, we're going to do a short play festival. The set will be the courtyard of a motel somewhere on Route 66, 2 motel doors, 4 characters max, 10 minutes. And so I came up with a play that I wrote and that they ended up producing. So they got I don't know how many submissions they got, but they selected 12. And built the stage outside in the parking lot next to the theater
Mm-hmm.
with, full lighting and sound and everything else because you couldn't be inside because of COVID. Um, and so that play, uh, my play is called Last Exit for Lodging. Also, you can find that on YouTube,
Awesome.
but it's a good, 10, 12 minute play. And it was just, it was great fun because it's having that prompt. It's like, okay, I've got to work with that. And I quickly had this idea, uh, and it needed several drafts to get it to where it ends up. But that was great fun. And then you get to see people up there uh, getting your lines wrong, and they drive you crazy.
Ah, I imagine. Here's something that's this what you did. The constraints of it's got to be 10 minutes long. Here's the prompt. This is where it's going to be. How do you feel about that? What does that do for you as a writer? Do you prefer it, or do you prefer to let your imagination run wild?
Well, when in this example, I loved it because I quickly had an idea that I thought was great,
Mm,
and that a lot. I think it was one of the better received plays of the 12 that were produced. Um, it was just it. First of all, it saved me some time. I didn't have to think of, oh, I could set a short play in a courtyard of a motel somewhere on Route 66. Uh, Given certain restraints, okay, what can I do with that? It's like opening the refrigerator. It's like, okay, what can I make? What are the ingredients that I've got to work with so I don't have to go to the store? And say, well, 4 actors, 2 doors, motel. Okay. And the range of plays that people came up with it was great. There were a couple of ghost stories. There was, there were some cheating spouses because that's what cheap motels are for. And there were a couple that were sort of otherworldly, so that the motel's not exactly what you think it is.
mm.
And so that's I thought it was great. I wouldn't want to, have to sit around and wait for somebody to come tell me, here's your prompt.
Right,
Now go write it. Because you don't, I could have just not written anything. There's
right.
no requirements.
Hmm. Right. Absolutely. It's, when I work with my writing students, for example, I do a lot of work with prompts, and usually they're like a location, an object, and a profession, and they have 10 minutes to write a story incorporating those three things or any one of those three things. And personally, I find that having that gives me, it's almost like a crucible, right? That I can, knowing what my constraints are, I can work anywhere within that. And so that brings me to a question for you. What do you do, if anything? And I'm not sure if this is even a question that's okay to answer or to ask, but what do you do to, I feel weird asking a professional writer this, but what do you do to improve your writing? How do you work to do that? Or do you feel like it's just part of the process and you're in the flow?
Well, you just keep writing. There's no doubt that I write better now than I did writing my first book, and by which point I had written a lot of stuff. I started off in radio, and I'd write a 30-second commercial or a 60-second commercial, and then I started writing a radio comedy show where it's 1 minute, 2 minute, 5 minute sketches, and then started writing sitcoms, which are 30-page scripts, and then screenplays, which are 120 pages. And it's sort of coincidentally that I did this. I mean, some people just start off by trying to write a novel
Mm-hmm.
or a screenplay or a short story. I just, as it happened, started writing these 30-second things, these commercials,
Mm-hmm.
and just kept ending up writing longer and longer form things. And as you do that, provided you take feedback and you're reading other people's stuff, and you're seeing where yours does not hold up to the people whose writing you admire, you can try to figure out why, and then try to you just look, because it's one sentence at a time, and then you write it and it's like, no, that word needs to be at the end of the sentence, and you recast the sentence, and you keep doing that with every sentence. And then, does the paragraph work? Does this section of the book work? And so forth. And if you do it long enough, and you're aware of, if you're just aware, you can just tell, oh, that's terrible. and I know what I'm trying to do, but I'm not doing it. And then you try to figure out why, and you can either try to, rewrite that thing, you wrestle it into, or no, just throw that out and try again. And you just got to be willing to do all that. And it takes time. And I was thinking, when you said you give your students a prompt and then you give them 10 minutes to write a story, it's like, that's terrible. You can't do anything in 10 minutes. I can't think of an idea sometimes in 10 minutes, not even a bad idea. And I took a class at UCLA Extension once after I had written my first book, but I wanted to keep, exposing myself to people who were teaching and other writers, and because you can always learn something. But one of the things was, okay, and she gave a prompt and said, now quick, write the story. And I just sat there for a minute and kind of, no, it's like telling a dog to sit. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not trained. I'm not a trained little monkey. And the main thing probably is that nothing dawned on me in the short period of time that I had. Otherwise, I probably would have tried to write something. But I hope your students know, and I'm sure you tell them, that whatever you come up with in the course of 10 minutes is not a final draft.
Oh, of course not. No. That's not what this is about. What it's about is to open up their sort of creative brain and start thinking about what they could write about. You don't have to have anything done. In fact, what you have to have is the time, that 10 minutes, to imagine what can you do? What might I talk about? What might this be? And that's what these exercises are designed to do. And I do the same thing with the writers group I run. And we've all started, actually, after a few months of doing this, we're all actually writing stories that have a beginning, a middle, and an end in 10 minutes. And so I think writers write differently. Some write every day, some write over a weekend, some whatever it is. When you're in that space, when you're in the writing space, like you said, now I'm not a trained monkey. So what do you need in order to feel like you are writing and creating at your peak?
Well, a lot of writing is thinking about what you're going to write. And so if I know, I've got, this woman is reaching the top of the list to get a heart, and she's been on the waiting list for so long because she's got a rare blood type, and then a heart becomes available. Well, what if somebody powerful wanted that heart? It could be a mob guy. It could be, what if it's the president? The president's going to come in and steal the heart. Well, the guy whose mother is supposed to get the heart takes exception to that, and off we go. He steals the heart, and the government's chasing him, and then the president's political opponent is chasing those people, and you can't write it all in a day.
Sure.
A novel. So you're always thinking about, okay, then what happens? And you're making notes about a rough idea of the scene where the FBI guy and the CIA guy, confront one another, whatever. it's like, so in Heart Seizure, that's the plot that I've been sort of talking about here. This guy has stolen the heart back that's his mom's supposed to get, and he's on the run. The beautiful plastics heart surgeon gave chase and ends up jumping in the back of his pickup truck, and then falls down when he takes a sharp turn. So she's unconscious now in the bed of his pickup truck. And so he's racing away from the hospital. And then, be on the lookout goes out, and the cop pulls the car over. Well, in the first draft, the cop, mirrored sunglasses, just staring at the guy, staring at the unconscious woman in the back of the truck, back at the guy. What's going on here? And the guy just sort of fast talks his way out of the problem and gets away. And then, well, okay, that's one way you can do it, but it's just kind of lying there. And it seems like there's something better can happen. So I went back and took another shot at it. So the cop pulls him over, sees the woman, and goes for it. And then the radio crackles, be on the lookout for this pickup truck with the plane. And so he goes for his gun, the cop does. And he fumbles it like Barney Fife, and it lands on the ground between him and the guy. And the narrator has explained this is the first time the cop has ever drawn his gun on the job, and now the gun's on the ground. And the son of the woman grabs the cop's gun and points at the cop, who throws his hands up in the air and says, "Don't shoot me, I'm gay." Oh my God, I can't believe how long I've been wanting to tell somebody for so long. So the guy comes out. It has nothing to do with anything, but it's like, that's much funnier than he talks his way out of trouble and he drives off. So, but now he has to kidnap the cop.
Right.
So he does. And I thought, well, there's an idea, because previously in this story, what I'm about to describe doesn't happen. In the course of things, people keep finding out about this guy with this heart and this surgeon and now a cop. And when somebody recognizes them, they have to kidnap those people too. So it's somebody in a Winnebago. So great, now we're in a Winnebago. And then it's a busload of a Mormon basketball team. And so now, they're now driving a school bus, and they've got a Mormon basketball team, and they got the people in the Winnebago. So it's like, well, that's just kind of funny.
Yeah, so, and it's a snowball rolling way downhill.
Yeah, and some of them can, and it's been so long since I wrote that one. Some of them could then try to sabotage. Some could try to do things that help them when they get in a tight spot. So it's just being open to, well, like you said, then what could possibly happen next?
Right. Especially once Murphy gets in the mix and everything goes wrong. And that's part of it. it's going to be challenges that your characters have to overcome.
And that's the better way to do it. I was at the Jackson Hole Writers Conference critiquing some work and trying to, and somebody had a story that, everything kind of went okay for the protagonist. It's like, well, if you've got somebody in a rowboat, it's going to go from this side of the lake to that side of the lake. If they just row across the lake, that's dull. But if a storm comes up, if the motor dies, if the boat starts to leak, if there are piranhas in the, find something that makes it, a challenge for the person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you put it that way, because it is, as writers, we just writing about, I rode that's fair. That's nice, but it's certainly not going to make for amazing storytelling if there isn't some kind of conflict or obstacle that your character has to overcome. And in your work, what I've noticed about reading your work, Bill, is that your characters have half a breath before the next obstacle shows up. Not even that. They might not even have half a breath, and then all of a sudden there's a bus careening towards them. And I love that, but it's also I laugh a lot when I read your work, and at the same time I cringe that I'm laughing at some of the macabre things that I'm laughing at. And I'm wondering, when you're writing these, what takes precedence? Is it what is what's going to be funny, or is it the conflict, or how do they lay one on top of the other?
You play that by ear, and then you go back and look at it, and it's like, well, that's cute, but it took an awful long time to get to the punchline. It has not developed any character at all. It's not moved the plot forward. It's just sort of like, oh, here's a joke.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, I'm sure I leave more in than I should, but I do go back and say, is it anything other than funny? If it's advancing plot or character or something, and it's funny, it's got a good chance that it'll stay. If it's just funny, it better be really funny. Back to something you said earlier about improving in writing. When Farrago Books, which is the publisher reissuing all the titles, asked if I wanted to do that, I said yes, if you'll let me re-edit the organ grinders. And they said, oh, sure, why not? So I took out 20,000 words.
Wow.
I think the original was 120, which is way longer than the story needed to be. The acquiring editor originally got the book and then was promoted, handed it to a second editor who promptly left for the advertising business, who handed it to a third editor who must have thought, well, two editors have already worked on this. I won't give him any notes.
Oh.
And this is book number 2, and and it's like, no, it really needed editing. So that's the one. I went back and I rearranged what parts of the story got told when, and I had this impossibly and unnecessarily complicated motive, sort of a dual motive for the main character's actions. And it's like, no, simple. This, he blames this guy for his father's death. Nice and easy. Nothing original, but it's a motive. And you don't have to go on for pages and pages explaining this more complicated idea that I had. And the book's much better for being 20,000 words lighter.
I'm going to believe you, except for that it is my favorite of your books. So now I'm going to have to go back and reread it and see what's different. Because that story has I know you've said, oh, it's a little convoluted. I had to cut things, and that this is sort of the writer's remix, if you will. Yeah. And yet I'm like, wait, what got cut? Because I love the story and I don't mind at all the extra 20,000 words. So I'm very curious to see what you decided to do differently. And when you're doing that, when you go back and you revisit these old friends, if you will, do you see that with the other books too, that you want to change things, or was The Organ Grinders one of the ones that really sort of set in that you wanted to make some changes?
Well, I think what happened is Pest Control was, first of all, it was based on the screenplay. So it had a lot of the problems worked out. The plot, the characters, the stuff was all, nice and neat in the screenplay. And then the research into insects was fun, fascinating, and really helped flesh things out. But the structure was very good on that one because it had been structured as a screenplay. Mm-hmm. Organ Grinders was my first time to try to write a novel from scratch. And while I had some sense of what the story was, and first, what sort of the 3-act structure, which is more of a screenplay thing, really. But I knew who was going to live and die and why. It was just sloppy, and I think I um, was nervous that, oh, it's not going to be long enough, so I'm going to go on and on and on about. In that the opening chapter of the version of Organ Grinders that you read is Bob as a kid going to meet this powerful businessman who he thinks is going to help him, save the planet. But it just goes on forever and ever. It's like, not that the sentences are poorly constructed or anything, but it's like nothing's going on. So now, now this starts with a scene at the baboon farm, which is later in the version that you read. It's like, so now it opens up with what in the world is going on at this secretive facility in the piney woods of Mississippi involving gigantic chacma baboons. I'm interested. It just seemed like a more interesting way to start.
Mm-hmm.
And then anyway, so the third book was cross-dressing based on a screenplay. So the plot was already worked out. The characters were already worked out. And I wouldn't, by that point, was getting a sense of how much, it took to reach 90,000, 100,000 words, which is the general length that publishers were looking for novels at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which is, not a great, thing, because if a story takes 80,000 words to tell well, 100,000, telling it in 100,000 words, not helping it.
Right.
The story should be the length that it needs to be to tell the story, not to meet the contractual obligation
Right.
of word count. So two of the first three were based on screenplays, and they were better structured because they had been pre-structured by virtue of being screenplays. Fender Benders, I think I had just gotten better. So that was an original idea. And I kind of knew what I was doing more by then. At that point, there's no going back then. I've got a 4-book deal. I need to keep working on the next one. And they're not going to go back and re-edit and reissue book number 2. That's just an opportunity that is available now, either through going through, Amazon Create Space or something like that. Or in this case, a publisher says, we want to reissue it. And if you want to re-edit that, great, let's do it. So that's how that worked out.
Wow. Yeah, it's fascinating to me that you found yourself in a position to edit the one book that you would like to change and come to it with the sensibility of who you are today versus 25 years ago when you wrote it. What about now? What about the work that you're doing now? I know that you have a new short story in an anthology, and I love the anthology's name. It's A Bag of Dicks. I'd love it if you talk a minute about what your writing is like now in this short story, and also a little bit about the anthology and where we who love your writing can get the anthology.
Sure. So periodically, just because, crime writers, and I'm sure this is true in other genres as well, somebody will decide they want to edit an anthology, and they'll, like Jim Fusilli, my friend Jim Fusilli, who was the pop rock critic for the Wall Street Journal for years. He's also a crime fiction writer. Got a deal for a book. It was called Crime and Music. And so he came to me because he knows how much I love music. I was in FM DJ for a while. And so wrote a story for that. In this instance, a guy named Colin Conway, who is an ex-Spokane police department, he was a cop in Spokane, but has become a crime writer, has what's called the 509 series. 509, I'm pretty sure, is the area code for Spokane. And so all of his crimes take place in this world that he's been writing about. And he reached out to a dozen people. He and I had never met. I think a mutual acquaintance, suggested that Colin might, asked if I wanted to write a short story. And it's so the most anthologies like Jim Fusilli's were just to have music somehow involved in the story. Everything is completely unrelated, story to story to story in that collection. In this one, Colin starts off with one of his regular characters, a detective, at the hamburger joint called Dick's, which is there's one in Spokane, and there are a couple in Seattle, but I think they're actually unrelated, even though their marketing all looks the same to me. And I lived in Seattle. I used to, and they're cheap hamburger stand hamburgers. But that's the bag of Dick's, which is just like, God, I wish I'd thought of that. It's just funny. Anyway, so he starts off with a character, one of his detectives, at Dick's Hamburgers, and he sees a guy running off with a bag, but something about the way he's running off just makes the cop think there's something going on there. And he sees one of some junkie guy that he knows by virtue of being a cop, and he calls him over and says, did you see that guy running off? I want what's in that bag, and if you find it and you bring it to me, you get a get out of jail free card.
Ooh. And
the guy sort of negotiates to get, what if I find 2 bags? The cop says, whatever, bring back the bag. And so then Colin's idea to all the writers was, now you somehow find a way to get word that this detective is offering a get out of jail free card if you bring back a Dick's hamburger bag with some element of a crime in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and everybody, and there were a few things that you couldn't do, but he mostly didn't have a lot of rules other than it has to take place in a certain period of time, because at the end of the book, he will wrap up the story. He will explain, what happens, with this detective, because I couldn't write about his detective. So in my story, it's a guy who is just come out of his second to last meeting with his parole officer, and he goes over to a friend's house and says, I just got back from meeting with the parole officer, but before that I ran into so and so, who and then he says, and there's this cop who's looking for, whatever this guy was running away with. And if you just bring it, it's a get out of jail free card.
Mm.
So the two of them, it's like, well, where this was 2 hours ago. The guy, it's probably just a bag of dope and he's shooting it up right now. I said, yeah, but the cop doesn't know what's in there. So it can, we can just, go do, find a gun, steal a gun from somebody, put it in there and turn it into the cops. If it turns out it's, related to some crime, we get get out of jail free card. So, and I've only read one story so far in the anthology. I just got my copy of it. I just read the first story. It's like, wow, it's a really good story. And mine, of course, is, is a couple of knuckleheads. And things, go badly for them, but it's sort of like the old game of, a bunch of people sitting around in a circle. One person whispers to the person to their right, the beginning of a story, and then they have to retell it to the next person, and they retell it. And by the time it gets around, the story is completely different.
Sure. It's like the telephone game.
Telephone game. And so that's the idea of the anthology, is that the stories are each independent, but they were all triggered by that first event.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I can't wait to, see what Colin does to wrap it all up. I mean, I guess he's free to, use any of the characters created by anybody else in any other story. I don't know that he had I don't think he had his story written beforehand. I should ask him. I'm just curious now that I think about it. But anyway, it's called A Bag of Dicks, and I'm sure it's on Amazon and anywhere else you can find your electronic or your physical books.
Awesome. I'm excited to read it. It sounds a little bit like Exquisite Corpse too, where you continue each other's stories, although this may not be a
Right.
continuation of each writer's. It's just everybody's different take on what could be in that bag. I love it. What a great idea. It makes me think of the suitcase in Pulp Fiction, that briefcase. Anything could be in that
Right.
briefcase.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what's in there. It's just the MacGuffin.
Exactly. And it lets you in, it gives you the in into the world you're going to create, which I absolutely adore.
Yeah.
Bill, I could keep you here for the next 6 hours, but I know you have a life to get back to. I would love to ask you a couple more questions if that's okay.
Sure.
First, before I do anything else, thank you so much for coming back on the show. And I'm going to put the link to our first conversation in the show notes for this one, because we didn't touch too much on the same topics. So I'm excited to share both of those things with. If you're listening, you of course know you need to go get all of Bill's books and read them right now. You know that. The reissues.
Get the reissued organ grinders. It's much better.
All right. I'm going to do it right after we get off this call.
I'll send you a copy.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. I would appreciate that so much, because I'm doing a lot of traveling right now, and that would be the perfect thing to read. And the other thing, what is next for you? What is the next project? If you want to tease anything, I would love to have a little scoop.
Well, I just got another short story invitation, and I've just got no idea. Let me see. Hang on. There it is. Private Dicks and Disco Balls.
Oh, that's
See,
right.
there's a theme developing here. You got any Michael Bracken, who has edited several crime anthologies, asked if I wanted to contribute a short story here, which is set in the 70s, and so as it turned out, I worked after working in radio, I worked in nightclubs during the disco era.
Oh boy.
And then later during the video era. So both in the 70s and in the 80s, did I spend time watching people do what they do at nightclubs.
The details of that are...
I've just got to figure out a story. I've certainly a lot of goofy things, strange things happen.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So, but that won't be out until, it's a year out, I'm sure. And I'm really focused on, I've done the rewrite on the play. And I do find myself thinking more about, another play. Because I really enjoyed writing it. It's a much simpler thing than a novel. And I like writing dialogue. So, I just need a new story. And it's funny because I do think of the limitations of this particular theater. You can't fly scenery in. You've got to pretty much build a set and work with the set. Now you can insinuate different places by lighting different, stage left, stage right. But it is sort of a limiting thing in as much as if you're writing a screenplay, you can write in all the special effects you want. Because they got computers that'll do that. If you're writing for an equity waiver theater with a 200 square foot set where you can't drop anything down from the ceiling or come up from below, there are certain limitations, and sort of going back to the question about the prompt, it's having certain limitations isn't necessarily a bad thing. It sort of focuses you on what you've got to work with. Like what's in the refrigerator, I can't cook with what ain't there.
Right. For sure. For sure. And it allows you, again, it create, to me anyway, it creates a crucible of sorts. So, it's what's interesting to me, Bill, with what you're talking about writing plays. One of my dear friends from high school is the president of the Dramatist Guild, Andrew Lippa, and he said something that I thought was really interesting about the fact that dramatists get to hold on to the copyright. They hold the rights to their plays, to their work. And how different is that for you, actually, now that I'm here and thinking of this question? How does that change your experience of writing the piece if you know that the rights stay with you?
Well, I mean, the copyright for all my books were always mine, but the ability to publish them was limited by the contract. So, eventually HarperCollins would say, okay, you can have the rights back to these 2 books, but we're keeping these 7. The copyright, is still in my name, but I can't compete with them because my contract says, no, we're the ones selling the books.
Right.
You can't also be selling the books. So it doesn't really have much impact, knowing, and I have no idea if the altruist, for example, what I am supposed to do with it after we get it up, assuming that it ever gets actually staged fully at the group rep. It's like, well, then what? I don't know enough about. I still don't know enough about the theater market to say, well, then, because I was looking for agents, and they're really, unless you're, David Mamet or somebody, Lin-Manuel Miranda, I don't know that there aren't really agents for playwrights in the same way that there are agents for TV writers and screenwriters, who then go to the television producers or the film producers and say, I've got this writer who's perfect for your series, or who has written this spec script. I've got to find out, because I know that people have their plays produced all around the country.
Sure.
Somehow. So how do you do that? So I'll be learning about that.
Yeah, there's a whole, they have to pay for the rights and get the scripts and all of that part of it. It's a different kettle of corn than.
There is something called the New Play Exchange that I was on briefly. NPX, I think, is the abbreviation. But I didn't have, it didn't do anything for me, and maybe I just wasn't working it the way it needs to be worked to get people. But maybe, in the course of being at the group rep, I think that we do, they will do seminars, and I think one that they talked about is a play marketing person. So I'll be attending that one.
For sure.
There's one other thing is a woman named Ann Ford is in the throes of trying to produce a documentary on the radio station where I worked first, WZZQ-FM. And it's legendary in the South among people of a certain age. And I had written I'd written a magazine article that was published some years ago about the station, and just happened to know a lot of details. So I'm kind of working on the documentary with her just because I was there and I had written about it, and I've got a lot of information. So I'm kind of learning also about how she's making this documentary film.
Wow. And maybe you'll become a documentarian after this too. Just keep branching out and doing cool things.
I'll be a talking head in the documentary. But,
yeah,
no,
but
I mean, there's already not enough money in playwriting. I don't think I need to get into documentary. I'm getting into puppetry next.
Mime. You will be a mime.
There's lots of money to be made as in the mime world.
Oh my goodness. Where I'm going to get all these comments from mimes and puppeteers. Hey, wait a
But
minute.
they won't say anything, will they?
That's true. I feel better now. Thank you
Blank
for that.
emails. All those mimes are sending the blank emails again.
Yes, and or maybe, just a wall, a picture of a glass wall. So
Right.
I'm as I said earlier, I'm super grateful that you took the time to chat with me again today. And you probably don't remember, but in case you do, I have that last question that I always ask everybody, which is, if you had an airplane that could skywrite anything for the whole world to see, what would you say?
We didn't do that last time, did we?
Yes, we did.
Really?
Yes,
what did
we
I
did.
say?
I don't remember. I'll have to go back and listen. But yes, absolutely we did. I do this with everybody who comes on the show. You're just stalling, aren't you? You're going, wait a minute, I have to think of something.
It's like, this is like you get 10 minutes to write a story.
First thing that comes to your
Buy
mind.
the edited organ grinder.
Succinct. I like it. That was beautiful, Bill. Thank you very
That's
much.
the best I could come up with.
Profound. No. It's absolutely right. You're a storyteller, and you told a story that you thought you could tell better, and you want people to go find that better version of the story. That
Maybe it'll
makes
save them time.
20,000 words worth.
Yeah.
Oh, I adore you. That's great. Thank you so much again for being on the show, Bill. This is Isolde Trachtenberg for the Innovative Mindset Podcast, reminding you that, first of all, you're going to need to go out and get all of Bill Fitzhugh's books, obviously. And if you get a chance to see The Altruist when it comes to your town, because I'm sure it's going to get staged lots of different places, you're going to need to see it. It is absurd and macabre and hilarious. So you're going to love it. Until next time, I remind you to be bold, be creative, and be kind. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and it would mean the world to me if you told a friend about it. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2021. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, remember to be bold, be creative, and most of all, be kind.